It was the night of September 14th, 1943. The forests along the Berezina River were silent, except for the low hum of insects and the faint echo of a German generator somewhere across the valley. A single wooden bridge stretched across the black current, 80 meters long, double-tracked, reinforced for armor transport. To the Germans, it was just another crossing. To the Soviet partisans hiding in the treeline, it was the last artery feeding a Panzer division that had been tearing through villages for months. The Wehrmacht called it Bridge 27A. To the man crawling beneath it in the dark, it was something else entirely. A suicide note written in wood, steel, and timing. His name was Alexei Turov. Before the war, he had been a bridge inspector on the Minsk line, obsessed with numbers and resonance. The way steel hums before it breaks, the tiny movements timber makes under stress. When the Germans came, his wife was killed in a bombing raid. After that, he stopped measuring bridges for safety. He started measuring them for revenge. Now he lay on his stomach, covered in mud, a coil of cable around his arm and a bag of tools that could fit in a shoebox. No dynamite, no fancy charges. Just a handful of iron pins, a hacksaw, a small lever, and one idea that even his comrades thought was madness. Alexei had spent 2 weeks studying the bridge from a distance, counting every patrol, every floodlight sweep, every vibration when trains passed. He noticed something the Germans didn't. The central truss had been replaced hastily after an air raid. The new steel beams were mismatched by a few millimeters, creating a hidden stress pocket near the left bearing. If that weak spot could be forced at just the right time under the weight of tanks, the structure wouldn't explode, it would fold like paper. But it would take precision, and luck, and probably his life. He moved by touch, pressing his ear to the cold steel. Above him, the bridge creaked softly in the night wind. He slipped a thin metal wedge under one joint, then another. He twisted the bolts half a turn, not enough to notice by day, but enough to shift load distribution by a fraction. Each change built a chain reaction. The bridge still looked perfect, but the math was wrong now, deadly wrong. He set a small wire with a tin contact plate onto a bent pin. When the first tank crossed, its weight would shear the pin, releasing the tension that held the bridge's center alignment. Gravity and stress would do the rest. He didn't speak while working. There was no one to speak to. The other partisans had retreated into the forest, watching from a hill 400 meters away. The plan was simple. Finish before 3 o'clock, cross the river, light a signal if he lived. If not, they'd hear the sound anyway. His hands shook once as he tightened the final nut. Then he froze. A truck approached from the far end, German patrol. He lay flat, body pressed into the beam, water dripping past his face. The headlights passed above, wood trembling, bolts groaning. He stayed still. The truck rolled on. He exhaled, chest heaving. The river moved slow below him, like time itself holding its breath. At 2:57 he finished. He crawled to the embankment, wiped the grease off his fingers, and whispered something only the wind could hear. If this works, they'll never reach Gomel. He slipped into the reeds and vanished into the forest. 3 hours later, the first Panzer train crossed Bridge 27A. What happened next erased an entire division overnight. But that's in the next part. Dawn came pale and cold over the Berezina. Mist hung low across the valley, curling around the blackened trees and the narrow railway that cut through them like a scar. By mid-morning, German engineers were inspecting the line ahead of the day's heavy transport. The division stationed near Gomel had been ordered to move west, and the first armored convoy was scheduled to roll within hours. The bridge Alexei had touched in the night stood silent, its trusses gleaming with dew. To every German eye that saw it, the structure looked perfect. They didn't know that its heart was already broken. In a command car half a mile away, Major Erich Bauer lit a cigarette and unfolded his orders. He was proud of his precision. His trains ran on time, his bridges were fortified, his men disciplined. The panzers loaded near the station were his responsibility. He didn't know that his confidence was about to become a death sentence. A signalman confirmed clearance, and the engines began to growl. 40 flat cars loaded with tanks, trucks, and ammunition lurched forward, clanking over the rails like the heartbeat of an empire that refused to slow down. In the woods, Alexei watched from behind a dead birch, his binoculars trembling in his hands. He hadn't slept. Every sound made him flinch, the wind, the rustle of water, the far-off echo of engines. He tried to steady his breathing, telling himself the math was sound. The structure's resonance under load, the weak flange on the western bearing, the shift in stress vectors, everything should fail precisely when the first tank hit the midpoint. Should. That word haunted him. He had done his work by feel, in darkness, with seconds to spare. The Germans inspected the bridge after dawn. If they had noticed the loosened bolts or the warped joint, they would have left guards. But the line was too busy, and war never waits. The rumble grew louder, deeper. Alexei's pulse matched it. He could see the headlight now, cutting through mist like a blade. The lead locomotive, a massive DRB-52 class, thundered toward the bridge, smoke pouring from its stack. The steel screamed as it met the approach span. Every vibration ran through the ground into Alexei's bones. He counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. The first tank reached the midpoint. The weakened pin bent slightly under the shifting load, but not enough. The bridge held. The second tank rolled on. Then the third. Alexei felt panic rise in his throat. Had he misjudged the load angle? Had the contact plate jammed? He gripped the binoculars tighter, heart hammering. Then, a sound like nothing he'd ever heard. Metal tearing in slow motion, bolts snapping in sequence, the entire truss shuddering as if exhaling. It began with a groan, then a roar. The center span twisted, steel beams folding like wet paper. The locomotive tilted forward, wheels lifting off the track. A wall of sound rolled across the valley as 40 cars followed the engine into the river. Tanks collided midair, exploding on impact. Ammunition cars burst like volcanoes, sending shards of iron across the mist. The bridge collapsed in a perfect arc of fire, steam, and smoke that blotted out the morning sun. Alexei stumbled backward, covering his face as the shockwave hit him. The ground shook, leaves fluttered like snow. Birds exploded from the trees in a frenzy. Then silence. Only the crackle of burning wood and the hiss of boiling water from the wreck below. Through the haze, he could see the remains. Steel ribs jutting from the river, tanks half submerged, the locomotive still belching steam like a dying beast. He had done it. One man, one night, and one impossible idea had erased a Panzer division before breakfast. He wanted to cheer, to scream, to tell someone it worked. But he didn't. He just sat in the mud, shaking, staring at the wreck that had once been Bridge 27A. The cost of that silence, and what followed next, would be far greater than he imagined. Smoke still clung to the valley 12 hours later, curling through the charred remains of the bridge like ghosts. The Germans moved fast. Trucks arrived with engineers, soldiers, dogs, and floodlights that cut through the fog like search beams in a nightmare. The air stank of oil, mud, and burned rubber. The wreckage of the Panzer train lay scattered across the Berezina like the bones of some mechanical giant. The official report would call it a structural failure, but no one on the ground believed that. You could see it in their faces, the fear, the disbelief, the quiet rage. Something had done this, something invisible, and that made it worse. By dusk, the Germans had sealed the area and begun dragging bodies from the water. Over 100 men gone, 4 dozen vehicles destroyed, the line cut for weeks. The division commander arrived from Gomel, furious and pale, demanding answers no one could give. Orders went out to search every village, every farmhouse, every tree line within 10 kilometers. A bounty was posted, 50,000 Reichsmarks for information about the saboteur. They didn't know his name, but they had found his footprints in the mud and a single broken wrench near the abutment. That was enough. Alexei had gone deeper into the forest, moving only at night, drinking from puddles and hiding by day under fallen logs. He hadn't expected to survive the explosion, but now survival felt like a curse. Every crack of a branch made him flinch. Every echo of boots sent his heart racing. He tried to sleep, but in every dream he saw the bridge folding, the tanks dropping, the screams swallowed by steam. He should have felt victory. Instead, he felt hunted. The other partisans met him 2 days later at a burned farmhouse. They stared at him like he was something not quite human. Word had already spread across the region. The miracle at Berezina, the engineer who toppled a Panzer division with no explosives. But along with the awe came something colder, fear. The Germans were burning entire villages in reprisal. In Smolensk, the WWII issued a memo calling the act the most effective single sabotage of the Eastern Front. They sent counter-sabotage teams, sappers, and interrogators. By the end of the week, 24 civilians had been executed near the riverbank. Alexei heard the stories whispered by refugees passing through the woods. His hands trembled whenever he thought of them. He told himself it wasn't his fault. That war never offers clean victories, but the logic didn't matter. Guilt had its own geometry impossible to balance. He began moving again at night, joining a small partisan unit in the forests east of Vitebsk. His commander, an old cavalry officer named Korsun, told him flatly, "You've done more damage than any of us, but now they'll hunt you forever." Alexei didn't answer. He spent his nights cleaning weapons he never used, staring into the fire until the coals looked like the burning wrecks on the river. The others called him the ghost of Berezina. He never corrected them. Weeks passed. German patrols intensified, bridges guarded day and night. But the loss of Bridge 27 rippled far beyond the valley. Supply convoys rerouted, repair trains delayed. The entire Eastern Front staggered for days. Somewhere in the confusion, a Soviet counterattack broke through the weakened line. Thousands of men lived because one man had risked everything. Yet in the forest, Alexei felt none of that triumph. Only the quiet, gnawing weight of what the world now owed him. He had destroyed a bridge. He had destroyed himself with it. The snow came early that winter, swallowing the ruins of Bridge 27A under a silent white shroud. From above, it looked as if nothing had ever happened. But in every German garrison from Minsk to Smolensk, there was only one name spoken in furious whispers: the saboteur who had erased a Panzer division overnight. The ghost of Berezina. Posters appeared on every wall. Sketches of a thin man in a tattered coat, dark eyes, reward doubled, then tripled. Patrols swept the forests with dogs and flamethrowers, burning anything that could hide a man. Yet Alexei still moved. Always at night, always between the patrol lines, as if the snow itself covered his tracks. He had learned to think like an engineer even in fear. He memorized the patrol intervals, the rail schedules, the frequency of searchlights sweeping across the valleys. The Germans believed the bridge had been destroyed by explosives disguised in the steel. They couldn't imagine someone dismantling their perfect geometry by hand. That disbelief kept Alexei alive. He changed his name, shaved his beard, and joined a work detail repairing the very rail line he had once destroyed. The irony was unbearable. For 2 weeks he worked under the eyes of German officers, measuring, hammering, tightening bolts, pretending to rebuild the empire he had broken. At night, he took notes in the margins of his ration book. Angles, forces, stress points. He wasn't finished. The destruction of the bridge had crippled one division, but the trains had resumed along a secondary route. That new bridge, Bridge 31C, was even stronger, reinforced with steel arches and watched by armed guards day and night. To reach it was suicide. To touch it without being seen was impossible. But Alexei no longer cared about survival. He was living on borrowed time, haunted by every innocent burned for his last success. He told himself this one would end it, for him and for the Germans. He built the plan in silence. No explosives, no noise, no flash of fire. He had learned that the most devastating acts were quiet ones. Bridge 31C crossed a frozen ravine where river ice pushed against the piers. If one could loosen the bolts of the central tension plate even slightly, the freeze-thaw cycle would do the rest. The bridge would collapse not from sabotage, but from nature itself. It was madness, and he knew it. But madness had already taken him this far. On January 14, 1944, he walked toward Bridge 31C disguised as a maintenance worker. The sky was gray, the world silent except for the wind scraping snow off the steel. German sentries smoked at the far end, too cold to care. Alexei moved beneath the bridge, tools hidden under his coat. Each step echoed softly in the frost. He reached the central span, found the plate, and began to turn the bolts one by one. His fingers bled from the cold, his breath froze on the steel, but he didn't stop. He loosened the last nut and whispered to himself, "Now let the river do the rest." Then he walked back into the blizzard and vanished. 3 nights later, the temperature dropped below -20. The ice expanded, groaning against the weakened structure. At 4:17 a.m., Bridge 31C folded in on itself. A German supply train, 20 tanks, ammunition, fuel, plunged into the ravine. The explosion lit the sky for miles. No one saw the man responsible, and by morning, the ghost of Berezina was a legend whispered even by those who hunted him. Dawn broke red over the ravine, the smoke still rising from the twisted wreckage. German recovery teams moved like ghosts among the frozen ruins, their breath white, their boots crunching over shattered steel. Bridge 31C no longer existed, only a jagged gap spanning black water and ice. 20 tanks lay submerged, half a Panzer division erased as if history had blinked. The official report would blame frost damage, structural fatigue, anything but sabotage. The High Command refused to believe that one man could dismantle their war machine with nothing but a wrench and silence. Yet in their eyes you could see it, the fear that someone, somewhere, understood their engineering better than they did. In the nearby forest, Alexei watched from a ridge, frost clinging to his coat like dust from another world. The blast had carried for miles, shaking the ground beneath his boots. He didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He simply lowered his head. It was over. His plan had worked too perfectly. The bridge was gone, the trains destroyed, and the German convoys rerouted hundreds of kilometers west, choking their own supply lines. For the first time since the war began, the Soviet advance around Orsha gained ground uncontested. The Germans didn't know why their fuel ran out, why their tanks sat idle. They just knew the enemy had struck somewhere they couldn't see. By sunset, German troops sealed off the area. Patrols searched every village, every farmhouse, shooting anyone who couldn't explain where they had been that night. The reprisals were brutal. Alexei hid in a half-collapsed root cellar under the ruins of an old barn, listening to the gunfire echo through the snow. Every shot was a name he'd never know, a life taken because of him. The victory tasted like ash. He told himself it was worth it, that every destroyed tank meant fewer dead in the Red Army, that every bridge collapse shortened the war by a heartbeat. But the silence afterward was unbearable. Weeks passed. The forests began to thaw, and with them came the end of his hiding places. Supplies ran out. His hands shook from hunger. He could have fled east to rejoin the partisans, but the thought felt meaningless. His war had already ended under the wreckage of that bridge. So one evening, when the forest was quiet again, Alexei walked back toward the river. The water ran black between the ice. He sat near the edge where the bridge once stood and opened a small leather notebook. Inside were pages of calculations, sketches of bridge joints, stress diagrams, the entire method written in his careful engineer's hand. He placed the book in a tin box, sealed it, and buried it under a rock by the shore. Then he looked across the ravine one last time and whispered, "No more bridges." When Soviet troops liberated the region months later, they found no trace of him. Only the ruined bridge and the legend that followed it. Engineers studying the collapse couldn't explain how it had failed so cleanly, so suddenly. They called it an act of God. The villagers called it vengeance. And somewhere in the snow and ash of the Eastern Front, the name of one man, never recorded, never confirmed, became a story told around campfires. The partisan who destroyed a Panzer division with nothing but courage, knowledge, and a suicidal idea that worked.